The streets of Selma, Alabama, lay quiet under a blanket of stars, illuminated by the soft glow of Christmas lights twinkling along front porches and storefronts. It was Christmas Eve, a night when the small southern town seemed to pause in collective celebration. Neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles and exchanged plates of pecan pie and sugar cookies. The church bells rang out softly, and the air carried a sense of peace, tradition, and the promise of new beginnings. But hidden beneath the serene surface, an extraordinary story was unfolding. It was the kind of story that would eventually ripple far beyond the modest streets of Selma, leaving a trail of questions no one could have anticipated. How does a man, beloved by his community and respected by his peers, carry a secret so explosive it could destroy everything in its path? What happens when the very foundation of trust within a family is shattered, not by an outsider, but by the people closest to you? And how could a husband and father, who seemingly had it all, manage to deceive even the FBI? This story is not about the kind of evil that creeps in from the shadows. It's not about a stranger or a passing threat. This is the kind of betrayal that comes from within, cutting deeper than any crime committed by an outsider. It's a tale of deception so intricate and deeply rooted that it would shake even the most unyielding pillars of loyalty. For Marcus Bennett, the sheriff of this quiet town, life was a delicate balance of duty and devotion. He was a man trusted with the lives and safety of thousands, but his own life was about to become a mystery more tangled than any case he had ever handled. Marcus's world was a house of cards, carefully stacked on faith, love, and family. And on that fateful Christmas Eve, the first card would fall. As Selma celebrated, carolers sang on street corners, their voices rising into the crisp winter night, unaware of the storm brewing behind closed doors. For months, Marcus had been plagued by a gnawing feeling, a sense that something was deeply wrong. It was a whisper in the back of his mind that wouldn't quiet, no matter how much he tried to ignore it. It wasn't the kind of suspicion you could easily pinpoint. It was more like a creeping unease, the kind that settles in your bones and keeps you awake long after the house has gone quiet. Family was everything to Marcus. He had spent years building a life centered on his wife and children, and in his eyes, his family was untouchable. They were his pride, his purpose, and his refuge from the harsh realities of his job. But something had changed. The small, seemingly inconsequential details of daily life had started to catch his attention. An offhand comment, a fleeting glance, a subtle tension he couldn't explain, and while he couldn't put his finger on it, Marcus knew something wasn't right. What he didn't know was that the truth would reveal a betrayal so unfathomable, so cruel, it would redefine everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and loyalty. And it would begin with a single piece of paper tucked into a Christmas gift that would turn this festive holiday into a nightmare. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the Bennett family gathered around the tree, exchanging gifts and laughter, the glow of the Christmas lights reflecting in their eyes. But for Marcus, there was no peace, no joy, only the weight of his unspoken fears. Little did he know, by the time the night was over, the life he had spent years building would be in ruins. What unfolded that night in Selma, Alabama, was a story that would captivate the nation, a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and unimaginable consequences. It would leave a trail of questions that even the sharpest minds in law enforcement would struggle to answer. How could something so horrifying happen within a family? How far would someone go to keep a secret? And how could the truth lead to such a brutal and bloody ending? This is the story of Marcus Bennett, a husband and father who thought he had it all, only to discover that the people he loved most were the ones who would destroy him. What began as a celebration of family and tradition ended in betrayal, violence, and heartbreak. And by the time the sun rose on Christmas morning, nothing in Selma, or in Marcus's life, would ever be the same. To truly understand the weight of the tragedy that would later unfold, we must first look at the story of the Bennett family, a family that, on the surface, seemed to embody everything good about small-town life. In Selma, Alabama, where life moved at a slower, more deliberate pace, the Bennetts were a picture of stability and warmth. Sheriff Marcus Bennett, with his steady demeanor and unshakable moral compass, was more than just a lawman. He was a cornerstone of the community. People trusted Marcus not just to enforce the law, but to do so with empathy and fairness. He was the kind of man who remembered birthdays, offered a hand when times were tough, and always knew the right thing to say in moments of crisis. But Marcus wasn't just Selma's sheriff. He was also a family man. At home, he was the devoted husband of Carla Bennett, a woman whose grace and quiet strength held their household together. Carla was the type of wife many aspired to be and others envied. She was deeply involved in her children's lives, ensuring they grew up with a balance of discipline and love, and always made sure the house on Oak Street felt like home. The family dinners she orchestrated weren't just meals. They were rituals of connection, where stories of the day were shared, laughter filled the air, and the bond between family members was reinforced with each passing moment. Their 4 children brought vibrancy to the Bennett household. Marcus adored his sons and daughters, each with their unique quirks and personalities. Whether it was tossing a football in the front yard, helping with homework, or attending a school recital, Marcus took pride in being present in their lives. He often said his family was his greatest blessing, a sentiment deeply rooted in the teachings of his father, Reverend Elijah Bennett. Elijah Bennett was no ordinary man. As the pastor of Selma's largest church, he was revered as a spiritual guide, a moral authority, and a man whose wisdom seemed boundless. His sermons on love, trust, and forgiveness resonated deeply with the congregation, and his reputation extended far beyond the church walls. To Marcus, Elijah was more than a father. He was a mentor, a role model, and the person who had shaped his understanding of faith, family, and duty. The Bennett family seemed to have it all: love, respect, and a strong foundation rooted in shared values. They were the kind of family you'd see on Christmas cards, the perfect blend of warmth and tradition. But perfection, as many would later learn, can be a mask for something much darker. As Christmas approached, the Bennetts were busy preparing for the holiday season. The house on Oak Street was decorated with Carla's meticulous touch. Garlands draped over the mantel, twinkling lights wrapped around the porch, and the smell of freshly baked cookies wafting through the air. It was a time of joy and togetherness, and Marcus relished every moment. He felt fortunate, even blessed, to have built a life so full of love and meaning. Yet, even amid the holiday cheer, a faint shadow loomed. Marcus, a man trained to notice the smallest inconsistencies in others, found himself unable to shake a feeling he couldn't quite define. It wasn't anything overt, just fleeting moments, like the way Carla's smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes, or how Elijah seemed unusually distracted during their weekly conversations. Marcus chalked it up to holiday stress, the kind that comes with balancing work, family, and community obligations. But the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of his otherwise peaceful life. On Christmas Eve, the Bennetts gathered in the living room to exchange gifts. The fire crackled warmly in the fireplace, and the children's laughter filled the room as they tore into brightly wrapped packages. Marcus watched from his favorite armchair, a cup of hot cocoa in hand, as Carla helped their youngest daughter untangle a stubborn ribbon. For a brief moment, all seemed right in the world. He felt a swell of gratitude, a deep appreciation for the life he had built with Carla by his side. But beneath the surface of this idyllic scene, a devastating truth was taking root. Unbeknownst to Marcus, his perfect family was harboring secrets. Secrets that would soon come to light in the most unimaginable way. The 2 people he trusted above all else, Carla and his father, Elijah, were bound by a betrayal. As Marcus sat by the fire, unaware of the storm that was about to engulf him, he glanced at Carla. "You've outdone yourself this year," he said with a smile, gesturing to the festive decorations and the spread of gifts under the tree. Carla returned the smile, her expression warm but guarded. "It's nothing, really," she replied softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. That moment, so ordinary on the surface, would later haunt Marcus. It was the calm before the storm, the final fleeting instance of blissful ignorance before everything he thought he knew about his life came crashing down. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Marcus couldn't have known that the very foundation of his seemingly perfect world was beginning to crack, and that the truth, once revealed, would be something he might never recover from. The Bennett family's story, once a testament to faith and unity, was about to take a turn so dark that it would forever change the way Marcus saw the people he loved most. Carla had already retired upstairs, her footsteps light and measured, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to follow. Something held him back, a nagging feeling that there was more to this night than holiday cheer. His mind wandered to the envelope in his office desk, a small but heavy secret that had loomed over him for weeks. He hadn't told anyone, not Carla, not his father, and certainly not his children. Marcus had always been the rock of his family, the one who handled problems with a calm, steady hand. But this wasn't just a problem. It was a Pandora's box that threatened to upend everything he held dear. He rose from his armchair and made his way to his study, the weight of his thoughts making each step feel heavier than the last. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open, revealing the small, cluttered space where he often escaped to sort through paperwork or simply think. The room was dimly lit by a single desk lamp, casting long shadows across the walls. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair, the envelope lying innocently where he had left it. For a moment, he simply stared at it, his heart pounding in his chest. He thought back to the day he had decided to send in the DNA tests. It had been a spur-of-the-moment decision, spurred by a series of small, seemingly insignificant doubts. His youngest son's smile. Wasn't it a little too similar to Elijah's? His daughter's mannerisms. Hadn't Carla once joked that she had inherited them from someone other than Marcus? And then there were the whispers, the offhand comments from friends that seemed harmless at first, but now echoed ominously in his mind. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts spiraling. He tried to convince himself that he was being ridiculous, that the envelope would contain nothing more than reassurance of what he already knew. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the envelope, his fingers trembling as he tore it. The room seemed to shrink as he read the results. The words blurred together at first, his mind refusing to process them. But as the truth sank in, a cold, numbing shock spread through his body. None of the children were his. Not one. The results weren't even ambiguous. They were definitive. And then came the final blow. The DNA matched someone else. Someone he had trusted completely. His father. Marcus dropped the paper as if it had burned him, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The revelation hit him in waves, each one more crushing than the last. His father. The man he had admired, the man he had modeled his own life after, was the biological father of his children. The betrayal was too immense, too unfathomable. Questions flooded his mind, each one more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Had Carla ever loved him, or had their marriage been a carefully constructed lie? And his father, what kind of man could do this to his own son? He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, and began pacing the room. His thoughts raced, colliding with one another in a chaotic storm. He wanted answers, but he didn't know where to start. Should he confront Carla? Should he go to Elijah? The very idea of facing either of them made his stomach churn. He felt trapped, as if the walls of his study were closing in on him. Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed on the desk, the sound jolting him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Carla. "Is everything okay? You've been down there a while." He stared at the message, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. How could she act so normal, so composed, when she was hiding something so monstrous? He typed out a reply, "I'm fine, just finishing some work," and hit send, his fingers trembling. But he wasn't fine. He was far from it. The man who had always prided himself on his ability to stay calm under pressure now felt like a ticking time bomb. He thought back to earlier in the evening, to the way Carla's smile hadn't quite reached her eyes. Was that guilt he had seen? Had she known all along that this moment would come? As the hours crept by, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He replayed moments from his life over and over in his mind, searching for signs he had missed. The way Carla and Elijah had always seemed close. Had it been more than just familial affection? The times Elijah had gone out of his way to spend time with the children, had it been out of guilt rather than love? By the time dawn broke, Marcus had made a decision. He couldn't keep this to himself. The truth was too big, too devastating to shoulder alone. But how would he confront them? How would he even begin to untangle the web of lies that had been woven around him? The answers would have to wait. For now, Marcus knew only one thing. His life, his family, his very identity had been shattered. And as he stared out the window at the first light of Christmas morning, he realized that the peace and joy he had always associated with the holiday would never feel the same again. But this was only the beginning. The fallout from the DNA test would reach far beyond the walls of the Bennett household, dragging secrets, betrayals, and buried truths into the light. And as Marcus prepared to confront the people he loved most, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. "Say something," Marcus said, his voice a trembling blend of fury and heartbreak. Carla opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths as tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. "Marcus," she finally whispered, her voice fragile, "it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" Marcus's voice cracked as he cut her off. He grabbed the envelope and waved it in the air, his movements wild, like he could barely keep himself from tearing the room apart. "Do you even hear yourself? It says right here, Carla, the twins, my kids, aren't mine. What part of that am I misunderstanding?" Carla flinched, her hands trembling as she reached out toward him. "Please, let me explain." "Explain?" Marcus's tone turned colder, darker. "There's no explanation for this, Carla. None." Her voice broke as she cried. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "Didn't mean for it to happen," Marcus roared, his voice echoing off the walls. He took a step closer, towering over her. "How long has it been going on? How long have you been lying to me? Years, Carla, years. While I was working to build a life for us, you were sneaking around." "I wasn't sneaking around." Carla's voice rose in desperation. "You were always so busy, Marcus, you never noticed me, never cared to ask if I was okay. I was lonely." And Marcus froze, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Don't you dare say his name," he growled. "Don't you even say it." Carla broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably as she crumpled onto the couch. "It wasn't like that," she said through her tears. "I was vulnerable. He used that against me." Marcus laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. "Oh, so now you're the victim? That's convenient." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "He was my father, Carla. My father. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed everything we built, everything I believed in." Carla looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear, Marcus, I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," Marcus said, his voice quieter now, though no less cutting. "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed me. Do you even realize what you've done?" Carla reached for him again, but he stepped back, his hands raised as if to ward her off. "Don't," he said, his voice trembling. "Just don't." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood there, his chest heaving, staring down at the woman he had once loved more than anything in the world. Now, she felt like a stranger, someone he could never trust again. "I can't do this," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Carla's sobs grew louder. "Marcus, please, don't leave. We can fix this. We can—" "There's no fixing this," Marcus said, cutting her off. "Not now. Not ever." He turned on his heel and grabbed his coat, ignoring Carla's cries as he walked out the door. The cold night air hit him like a slap, but it barely registered. His mind was a whirlwind of anger, pain, and betrayal. He didn't know how long he had been driving. The streets of the town passed by in a blur, the holiday lights strung across houses and storefronts mocking him with their cheer. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. The car's headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, but Marcus wasn't paying attention to where he was going. He didn't care. He just needed to get away. Away from the house. Away from Carla. Away from the truth. As he drove aimlessly through the night, a single thought consumed him. How had his life come to this? How had everything he believed in, everything he trusted, fallen apart so completely? And yet, somewhere deep in the back of his mind, another thought was beginning to take shape, a question that filled him with dread. He had confronted Carla, but now he would have to confront the man who had betrayed him even more deeply. His father. But that confrontation would have to wait. For now, all Marcus could do was drive, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him like a physical force. And as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Marcus realized that he was no closer to finding peace than when he had first stormed out of the house. The car screeched to a halt outside the old colonial steel house Marcus had once called home. It loomed over him now, a twisted relic of his childhood, its holiday decorations glowing eerily in the dawn's pale light. The garland on the porch railings and the wreath on the door might have seemed welcoming to anyone else, but to Marcus they were mocking reminders of the facade his family had maintained for years. He sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands, the DNA results lying on the passenger seat like a grenade waiting to detonate. The thought of facing his father made his stomach churn, but the rage in his chest burned hotter. There was no turning back now. The door creaked open before Marcus could knock. Reverend Elijah Bennett stood there, dressed in a pressed shirt and slacks, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. His face shifted from confusion to cautious recognition when he saw Marcus. "Marcus," Elijah said with a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "What brings you here so early? Is everything okay?" Marcus stepped forward, holding the crumpled DNA results in his fist. His jaw was tight, and his voice came out low, almost a growl. "Does this look okay to you?" Elijah's brow furrowed as he took the paper. His eyes scanned the contents, and his face paled. He swallowed hard, setting the coffee mug down on a small table by the door. "Marcus, I can explain." "Explain?" Marcus's voice cracked as he shoved Elijah back into the foyer, slamming the door behind him. "Explain how you slept with my wife, how you ruined my family, or how you lied to me for years while pretending to be some moral authority." Elijah held up his hands in a placating gesture. "It wasn't like that, son. You have to understand." "Don't you dare call me son!" Marcus roared, his voice echoing in the house. The holiday music playing faintly in the background seemed grotesquely out of place. "You don't get to use that word after what you've done." Elijah sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "It was a mistake, Marcus. A terrible mistake. I never meant for it to happen, but Carla, she was lonely, vulnerable, and you—" "Don't!" Marcus cut him off, his chest heaving. "Don't you dare try to blame me for this. You took advantage of her. Of us. And you call yourself a man of God?" The tension in the room was suffocating. Elijah's face hardened, his voice dropping. "You don't know everything, Marcus. You don't know what it's like to carry the weight of a family and a congregation. I made one mistake. Deal with it destroyed with your actions. I'm not staying if I stop you doing this alone." "There isn't a mistake, Elijah. This is a betrayal of everything you taught me to believe in, of everything I thought you stood for." Elijah's expression shifted, his tone growing defensive. "You think you're so righteous, Marcus. You think you've never made mistakes? Life is messy. People are messy. You don't understand." "Don't justify this." Marcus's voice cracked with fury. His hands trembled as he clenched them into fists. "You tore my family apart, and now you want to play the victim? You're a coward." Elijah stepped forward, his voice rising. "Watch your tone, Marcus. You don't know what it's like to be in my position, to carry the burdens I've carried. Maybe if you'd been more present in your own marriage, this wouldn't have happened." That was it. The dam broke. In a flash, Marcus lunged forward, his fist connecting with Elijah's jaw. The older man staggered back, knocking over the coffee table. The mug shattered on the floor, spilling coffee that mixed with the crimson streak now dripping from Elijah's lip. "Marcus, stop!" Elijah shouted, holding up his hands. But Marcus didn't stop. Years of resentment, anger, and betrayal erupted like a volcano. He grabbed a heavy candlestick from the mantel, raising it above his head. Elijah's eyes widened in fear. "Marcus, don't." The candlestick came down with a sickening thud. What happened next remains unclear. Some say Marcus snapped, unable to control the flood of emotions that had been building since Christmas Eve. Others believe Elijah provoked him, taunting him in a moment of arrogance. What is known is that when the police arrived, Reverend Elijah Bennett was dead. Blood stained the hardwood floor, mixing with the holiday decorations that now felt grotesque in the scene's brutality. If you believe trust is the cornerstone of every relationship and betrayal is one of the deepest wounds, subscribe to the channel. Only those who condone betrayal would choose not to subscribe. Characters descent. Marcus Bennett, Carla Bennett, and Elijah Bennett are Black American.